The silence in the Grand Council chamber was deafening. Tall windows stretched from floor to ceiling, letting in the purple light of 3 moons, casting long shadows across the worried faces of the council members. The chamber, usually filled with passionate debates and diplomatic exchanges, now held only fear. Councillor Dak's hands shook as he adjusted his ceremonial robes. The weight of what he had to say pressed down on him like a physical force. Around the circular table, 22 of the most powerful Valerians waited, their scaled skin reflecting the dim light, their usually bright eyes now dulled with concern. "The reports from Colony World Terrace are confirmed," Dak said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone is dead. Not just dead, transformed." He pressed a button on the control panel, and a hologram sprang to life in the center of the table. The images made several council members gasp. Streets once filled with life now showed crystalline statues. Former citizens frozen in their final moments, a mother reaching for her child, a merchant mid-stride, a group of students, their books scattered around their glassy forms. Each figure was hauntingly beautiful, like artwork made of diamond, but these were no art pieces. They were tombs. "It spreads faster than anything we've ever seen," Dak continued, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. "The plague turns organic matter into crystal within hours. Touch one infected crystal, and within a day, you become one yourself." He switched to another image, showing the spread pattern across their territory. Red dots marked infected worlds, spreading like a virus across their star maps. First Elder Mira, her age showing in her trembling voice, spoke up. "How many have we lost?" Dak closed his eyes. 3 major colony worlds are completely gone. Terrace, Velen, and Nexus Prime. But that's not the worst of it. He touched another control, and the map zoomed out. "We've lost contact with all Outer Rim settlements. The quarantine protocols we put in place, they failed. Based on our latest estimates, we've already lost 2 billion citizens." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. 2 billion lives, gone in less than a month. It was beyond comprehension. "Surely the Galactic Alliance will help us." Young Councillor Reth stood up, his optimism not yet crushed by the weight of reality. "They have technologies we've never even dreamed of. They must have a solution." Dak's expression grew darker. "We've sent emergency broadcasts to every advanced civilization we know. The Zentari, the Eldorians, even the ancient Unxil. Their responses." He paused, fighting back bitter tears. "The Zentari cut off all diplomatic channels the moment we mentioned the plague. The Eldorians threatened to destroy any of our ships that approached their space. The Unxil simply said they would observe from a safe distance." The council chamber fell into chaos. Some members shouted in anger, others wept openly. First Elder Mira simply sat there, staring at the holographic display of their dying civilization. "Show them the progression data," Second Elder Cole said quietly. Dak nodded and activated another simulation. The hologram showed a time-lapse of the infection spreading across a city. It started with a single crystal formation in a park. Within hours, crystal tendrils spread through the grass, up trees, across walkways. When they touched living beings, the transformation was almost beautiful, if you could forget you were watching people die. The crystals spread through their bodies like ice forming on a lake, leaving behind perfect, transparent statues. "The plague seems almost intelligent," Dak explained. "It follows population centers, spreads along transportation routes. It's not just killing us, it's converting our entire biosphere into crystal formations." He switched to microscopic views, showing cellular structures being transformed. "Our scientists say it's unlike anything they've ever seen. It's not a virus, not a bacteria. It's something new." First Elder Mira finally spoke again, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of Valerian history. "How long? How long until it reaches our core worlds?" Dak's answer came like a death sentence. "At its current rate of spread, 3 months, maybe 4. Unless we find help, unless we discover a way to stop it." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the chamber understood. The Valerian civilization, one of the oldest spacefaring races in their arm of the galaxy, was facing extinction. Their calls for help echoed across the stars, met only with silence and fear. As the council members looked at each other, the terrible truth settled in their hearts. They were alone. Outside the chamber windows, the three moons continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the tragedy unfolding beneath them. In cities across the planet, citizens went about their lives, unaware that their entire civilization was about to change forever. And somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between the stars, a young species called humanity was about to receive a distress signal that would change the course of galactic history. The soft hum of the Horizon's engines was the only sound in the vast emptiness of space as Captain Song stared through the main viewport. His ship hung motionless against the backdrop of stars, all systems running quiet except for essential life support. Before them floated what should have been a bustling Valerian outpost. Instead, it was a ghostly sculpture of crystal and metal. All readings indicate no life signs, Captain, reported Officer Yoon from her station. Her fingers moved steadily across the control panel, but her voice carried an edge of unease. The station's main power is offline. Emergency systems are at 2%. Captain Song stood from his command chair, his experienced eyes studying the station's unusual appearance. After 15 years of deep space exploration, he thought he'd seen everything. He was wrong. The entire structure was covered in translucent crystals that caught the light from their ship's external lamps, creating rainbow-like refractions that danced across the station's hull. Launch Probe 3 for closer inspection. Song ordered. The small drone detached from the horizon with a soft thud, its cameras providing detailed images of the crystal formations. They weren't random. They seemed to follow patterns, spreading out from central points like frozen waves. Lieutenant Lee, the ship's chief science officer, leaned closer to his monitor. Captain, these readings, they're unlike anything in our database. The crystals appear to be growing directly from the station's metal structure. Growing. Song moved to Lee's station, studying the readings himself. That's impossible. Crystals don't grow in space, not like this. Permission to lead an expedition team, sir? Lee asked, his scientific curiosity evident in his voice. We need samples if we're going to understand what happened here. Song considered the request carefully. His first duty was to his crew's safety, but they were also explorers. This could be the discovery of the century, or a deadly trap. After a moment's thought, he nodded. Assemble your team. Full containment protocols. No risks. Within 30 minutes, 2 shuttles approached the crystallized station. Lee led the first team, while Security Chief Park commanded the second. Their suited figures looked tiny against the massive structure as they used their maneuvering packs to reach an airlock. The crystal formation seems to have spread from inside out. Park's voice crackled over the comm. Look at how it's erupted through the seams in the hull plating. The teams worked their way inside, their helmet lights casting eerie shadows through the crystal-covered corridors. Every surface glittered, creating a beautiful but unsettling maze of reflections. They found no bodies, but the crystals had formed in shapes that suggested people had been there when whatever happened took place. Over here, Lee called out, his voice excited. I found the central computer core. He carefully approached the crystallized console, his sensors working to locate any salvageable data storage units. As Lee worked to extract the data cores, Song watched from the horizon's bridge. Every muscle tense. Something about this situation felt wrong. His years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now they were screaming danger. Sir, Officer Yoon called out suddenly, I'm picking up energy readings from the crystals. They're responding to our presence. Lee, get out of there now. Song ordered, but Lee was already focused on carefully removing the final data core. Almost got it, Captain. Lee replied, his hand steady despite the urgency in Song's voice. These crystals, they're not natural formations at all. The molecular structure is too organized, too precise. This wasn't an accident or a natural phenomenon. It's more like an infection. The word infection sent a chill down Song's spine. All teams, immediate evacuation. Return to the ships. That's an order. As the teams retreated, their sensors captured something that would later haunt their dreams. The crystals where they had taken samples were slowly, almost imperceptibly, growing back. Back on the horizon, Song quarantined both teams and the samples in the ship's containment bay. As he watched Lee begin his analysis through the observation window, he opened a secure channel to Earth Command. Whatever they had found here needed to be reported immediately. Earth Command, this is Captain Song of the Horizon, he began, his voice grave. We've discovered something in deep space that requires immediate attention. I believe we found evidence of an extinction-level event, and if we're not careful, it could spread to human space. As he waited for Earth's response, Song looked once more at the crystallized station through the viewport. In all his years of exploration, he'd never felt such a mix of wonder and dread. They had just made first contact with something that could either revolutionize human understanding of the universe or destroy everything they held dear. The crystals continued to shimmer in the darkness, beautiful and deadly, holding secrets that could change the fate of not just humanity, but an entire alien civilization they hadn't even known existed until today. Red warning lights flashed silently outside the Level 4 containment lab as Dr. Kim peered through her microscope. Her hands, steady despite 40 hours without sleep, adjusted the focus. The crystalline sample beneath the lens pulsed with an inner light that both fascinated and terrified her. Coffee. Her assistant placed a steaming cup next to her workstation. She didn't even look up. Put it with the others, she mumbled, gesturing vaguely at 3 untouched cups growing cold nearby. The data streaming across her screens told a story that made sleep impossible. The crystal samples from the Valerian outpost weren't just growing. They were evolving. The lab's white walls seemed to close in around her as she worked. Time was running out. According to the decoded Valerian data, their last sanctuary world lay directly in the plague's path. 3 months. That's all they had to find a solution before another civilization vanished into crystalline silence. A soft chime announced an incoming video call. Dr. Kim sighed as Admiral Park's stern face appeared on the main screen. Behind him, the flags of Earth's United Space Command hung still in his office. "Doctor, the Security Council is demanding updates," Park said without preamble. "The Zentari ambassador just left my office. They're threatening to cut all diplomatic ties if we continue investigating the plague." Dr. Kim pushed back from her microscope, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "They're scared, Admiral. All these advanced species, with their mighty empires and ancient technologies. They're terrified of something they don't understand. Can you blame them?" Park's expression softened slightly. "The data you sent shows this plague has already consumed 3 civilizations before the Valerians, which is exactly why we need to solve this." Dr. Kim pulled up her latest findings on a secondary screen. "Look at these structures. The crystals don't just kill, they transform. They're trying to create something, but the process is flawed. It's like watching a computer program with corrupted code trying to rewrite reality." The Admiral leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "The other species warned us not to get involved. They say we're too young, too reckless, that we don't understand the cosmic consequences. But we can't just watch a civilization die," Dr. Kim countered, her voice rising with passion. "We've never seen anything like this before, but that might be our advantage. We're looking at it with fresh eyes, without centuries of preconceptions and fears." She turned to another screen, showing a simulation of the plague's spread. The Valerians tried fighting it with energy weapons. It adapted. They tried quarantine. It found new vectors. They tried running. It followed. But they never tried understanding it, really understanding it. A sudden alert drew her attention. The latest test results were in, and Dr. Kim's eyes widened as she read them. "Admiral, I think we just found something. The crystals. They're not just growing randomly. They're following a pattern, like a language written in molecular structure. Park's expression remained guarded. A language. What's it saying? I don't know yet, Dr. Kim admitted. But this changes everything. If it's trying to communicate. She trailed off as new possibilities exploded in her mind. Doctor, Park's voice turned grave. I don't need to remind you what's at stake. If this plague reaches Earth. It won't, she interrupted firmly. Because we're going to stop it. Not by running, not by fighting, but by understanding. She glanced at the gallery of crystal images on her wall. Beautiful, deadly, mysterious. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our weapons. It's our curiosity. Our refusal to accept that something is impossible just because everyone says it is. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. You have the full support of the Security Council. Whatever you need. Resources, personnel, equipment. It's yours. Just find us an answer before that plague reaches the sanctuary world. As the call ended, Dr. Kim turned back to her microscope with renewed determination. Somewhere in these crystalline structures lay the key to saving an entire civilization. The other species might have given up, might have chosen to watch from a safe distance as another culture vanished into crystal silence. But humanity had never been good at standing by. They were going to solve this puzzle, even if they had to rewrite the laws of physics to do it. Because that's what humans did best. They looked at the impossible and saw only a challenge that hadn't been overcome yet. The crystals glowed softly under her microscope, their molecular dance holding secrets that could save or doom worlds. And in her lab, surrounded by cooling coffee cups and endless data streams, Dr. Kim settled in for another sleepless night of unraveling those secrets, one crystal at a time. The emergency meeting room at Earth's Space Defense Command was filled with tension. Military leaders and scientists sat around the massive oak table, their faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights above. Reports of the crystal plague's advance toward the last Valerian world dominated the holographic displays on the walls. Admiral Park was in the middle of a grim assessment when the doors burst open. Dr. Han stumbled in, his lab coat wrinkled, hair disheveled, and eyes wild with excitement. Everyone turned to stare at the usually composed scientist, who was now clutching a tablet and trying to catch his breath. "It's not just a crystal," he exclaimed, completely ignoring protocol. "It's a silicon-based organism, and more importantly, we know how to stop it." The room erupted in murmurs. Dr. Kim, who had been working alongside Han for weeks, stood up from her seat. "What did you find?" Han rushed to the central display terminal, his fingers flying over the controls. "Look at this," he said, bringing up microscopic images of the crystal structure. "We've been thinking about it all wrong. We kept treating it like a disease or a chemical reaction. But it's alive." The hologram showed the crystal's molecular structure in stunning detail. As they watched, the pattern shifted and changed, almost like a heartbeat. 3 hours ago, we introduced a new carbon compound to the sample," Han continued, switching to another image. The crystal tried to absorb it, just like it does with all organic matter. But this time, something different happened. The next series of images showed the crystal structure beginning to break down. Several military officers leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the display. "The plague isn't just converting organic matter," Han explained, his voice steadying as he fell into lecture mode. "It's attempting to create more of itself. It's reproduction, but on a molecular level. And that's where we found its weakness." Dr. Kim's eyes widened as she understood. "The carbon bonds." "Exactly." Han nodded enthusiastically. "We modified common soil bacteria to produce a specific enzyme. When it encounters the crystal structure, it breaks down the silicon bonds faster than they can reform. The crystal can't maintain its integrity." General Cho, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "In simple terms, Doctor, what exactly are you saying?" Han took a deep breath. We can stop it. We can actually stop it. The bacteria we modified. It's like acid to the crystal plague, but completely harmless to normal matter. We've already tested it on larger samples. The crystal structures completely break down within hours. The room burst into excited discussion, but Admiral Park raised his hand for silence. What about deployment? How do we get this bacteria where it needs to be? That's the beautiful part, Han said, switching to a new diagram. The bacteria is incredibly hardy. It can survive in space with minimal protection. We can load it into simple dispersal pods. Once it makes contact with the crystal structures, it multiplies rapidly. Dr. Kim stepped forward. We'll need to produce it in massive quantities, and we'll need a delivery system that can cover an entire planet. Can we be certain it won't have unforeseen effects? General Cho asked, ever cautious. We don't want to save the Valerians only to poison their worlds. Han shook his head. The bacteria is specifically engineered. Once it runs out of crystal structures to break down, it becomes dormant and eventually dies. We've run over 50 simulations. It's safe. Admiral Park stood up, his decision made. How long to produce enough for a planetary-scale deployment? With every production facility running at maximum capacity, Han calculated quickly. 2 weeks. Maybe less if we get help from the private sector. Make it 10 days, Park ordered. I'll have every resource you need authorized within the hour. He turned to the rest of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a solution. Now we need to implement it before that plague reaches the sanctuary world. As the meeting dissolved into focused planning sessions, Han found himself staring at the holographic display of the crystal structure. It was beautiful, in its way. A perfect pattern repeated endlessly, trying to convert all life into its own image. But humanity had found its flaw, its weakness. For the first time since the discovery of the plague, hope felt real. They weren't just theorizing anymore. They had a weapon. A way to fight back against something that had terrified even the most advanced civilizations in known space. Outside the command center, the sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Somewhere out there, across the vast darkness of space, the crystal plague was still advancing. But now it was racing against more than time. It was racing against human ingenuity and determination. And humanity had no intention of losing this race. Stars streaked past the massive viewports of the flagship Mercy as the largest fleet in human history thundered through space. 500 ships, from massive carriers to agile corvettes, moved in perfect formation. The sight would have been beautiful if not for the desperate urgency of their mission. Colonel Choi stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied the tactical display. Every ship was marked in green, each carrying enough of the counter-agent to treat a small continent. The combined fleet represented humanity's total spacefaring capability, every ship that could be spared, every crew that could be assembled. Status report, he commanded, his voice steady despite the tension that filled the bridge. All ships maintaining formation, sir, the tactical officer responded. Engineering reports the engines are running at 110% capacity. They say they can push it to 115% if needed. Choi nodded. They were already moving faster than any human fleet had ever traveled. The engines of every ship pushed far beyond their safe limits. But it still might not be enough. Message from the Valerian sanctuary world, his communications officer called out, her voice tight with concern. They're reporting first contact with the plague. Crystal formations have been detected in their outer atmosphere. The bridge fell silent. They all knew what that meant. Choi closed his eyes for a moment, calculating. How long? At current speed, we'll reach them in 50 hours. But according to the spread patterns, the officer's voice trailed off. Say it, Choi ordered. The planet has less than 48 hours before total crystallization begins. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Choi turned to the main viewport, watching the streaking stars. Everything they had learned about the plague told them that once crystallization began, It spread exponentially. They would arrive just hours too late to save billions of lives. "Signal all ships," he said finally. "Tell engineering to push the engines to maximum output. I don't care if they burn out afterward. We need every bit of speed we can get." Warning alerts began flashing across control panels as the ship's engines were pushed beyond their design limits. The entire fleet accelerated, metal groaning under the strain. Dr. Hand's voice came over the comm from his lab several decks below. "Colonel, the counter-agent is stable, but these acceleration forces, we're pushing the containment systems to their limits. Can they hold?" A pause. "They have to." Choi turned to his tactical display again. Behind their fleet, he knew other alien civilizations were watching. The Zentari, the Eldorians, all the ancient races that had chosen to stand aside. They had called humanity reckless, foolish, too young to understand the consequences of their actions. Perhaps they were right, but humanity had never been good at standing by while others suffered. "Message from Earth Command," the communications officer announced. "They're asking for a status update. Tell them." Choi watched as another warning light began flashing on the engineering panel. "Tell them we're going to make it, whatever it takes." The hours crept by with agonizing slowness. Every status update from the sanctuary world brought worse news. The crystal plague was spreading faster than their models had predicted. Cities were already being evacuated. The Valerians were fighting with everything they had, but against this enemy, conventional weapons were useless. "Sir," his tactical officer called out suddenly, "I'm picking up something ahead. Multiple signals, moving fast." Choi leaned forward. "Hostile?" "No, sir. They're Valerian ships. Dozens of them. They're forming an escort formation around our fleet." A new voice came over the fleet-wide channel, the Valerian High Commander herself. "Human fleet, we will guide you through our defense grid. Our remaining ships will provide whatever assistance you require. We thank you for coming." Choi straightened his uniform and activated the ship-to-ship comm. "High Commander, humanity stands with the Valerian people. We're bringing help, and we're going to make it in time." He turned to his crew, seeing the determination in their eyes. They all knew the stakes. Every minute they could shave off their journey time meant thousands of lives saved. Every second counted. "Push the engines harder," he ordered. "Whatever it takes." The fleet surged forward, trailing blue fire across the stars, racing against time itself. Behind them, their engines were literally burning themselves out. Ahead lay either triumph or tragedy. But they would not slow down, would not give up. Because that's what humanity did best. They defied the impossible. They fought the unwinnable fights. And sometimes, just sometimes, they changed the course of history itself. The sanctuary world waited ahead, its fate balanced on a knife's edge. And humanity's fleet thundered toward it, carrying hope in the form of modified bacteria, and the unshakable determination to save a civilization that had never given up hope that someone, somewhere, would answer their call for help. The sanctuary world hung in space like a jewel slowly being consumed by frost. Captain's song washed from the shuttle's viewport as crystalline formations spread across the planet's surface, visible even from orbit. The beautiful patterns would have been mesmerizing if they didn't represent billions of lives at risk. "Ground teams, prepare for deployment," Song announced over the comm. "Remember your training. Speed is life today." Hundreds of shuttles descended through the atmosphere, carrying teams of humans ready to fight an enemy they couldn't shoot or bomb. The counter-agent, their only weapon, was loaded into specially designed dispersal packs on each person's back. Song's shuttle landed in what had once been a bustling Valerian city center. Crystal formations had already claimed several buildings, their spires reaching toward the sky like frozen lightning. The streets were chaos. Valerian civilians running from the advancing crystal front, emergency workers trying to maintain order. "Teams, spread out. Focus on population centers first," Song ordered as his people poured out of the shuttles. Their protective suits gleamed in the alien sunlight as they moved through the streets, deploying the counter-agent in precise patterns. Lieutenant Lee's voice crackled over the comm from across the city. Sector 3 is clear. The counter-agent is working. The crystals are breaking down. Song watched as the bacterial solution did its work. Where it touched the crystal formations, they began to crumble, turning to harmless dust. But for every area they cleared, new formations appeared elsewhere. Captain, Dr. Han's voice cut through the comm chatter. The plague is adapting. It's spreading faster than our models predicted. At this rate, Song saw it himself. His teams were moving as fast as they could, but their bulky protective suits slowed them down. The plague was outpacing them, spreading through streets and buildings faster than they could deploy the counter-agent. That's when he made a decision that would be written about in history books. All teams, remove protective gear. Keep only your respirators. Sir, Lee's voice was incredulous. The risk of contamination is less important than saving this world. Song finished. We've tested the counter-agent. We know it works, and we know we can't win this fight if we keep moving this slowly. He started removing his own suit. Sometimes you have to risk everything to save others. One by one, his teams followed his lead. They moved faster now, running through the streets with their dispersal packs, covering more ground than ever before. The Valerians watched in awe as these aliens risked their lives to save people they had never met before. North Quadrant clear. Western District responding to treatment. Crystal recession confirmed in sectors 5 through 8. The reports came in faster now. Without their protective suits weighing them down, the human teams covered ground at 3 times their previous speed. But the plague hadn't given up. New crystal formations erupted from the ground, racing up buildings and across parks. Captain, Lee called out urgently. The main hospital. The crystals are approaching the critical care ward. Song was already running, his boots pounding against the pavement. He could see the hospital ahead, its lower floors already beginning to crystallize. Inside were thousands of Valerians too sick or injured to evacuate. All available teams to the hospital, he ordered, sprinting up the steps. Crystal formations grew around him, beautiful and deadly. He deployed the counter-agent as he ran, watching the crystals crumble in his wake. Teams of humans converged on the building from all directions, dispersing the bacterial solution in waves. The crystal advance slowed, then stopped, then began to recede. Hours passed like minutes as they fought block by block, building by building. Some humans showed signs of crystal infection, but the counter-agent in their systems fought it off. They were tired, scared, but none of them stopped. As the local sun began to set, Song stood on a rooftop, watching his teams work. Below, humans and Valerians worked side by side, clearing the last crystal formations from the city. The plague was being pushed back, defeated not by weapons or technology, but by courage and determination. Sometimes, he said quietly to himself, watching a crystal spire crumble into dust, the most powerful weapon isn't what you carry, but what you're willing to risk. The battle wasn't over. Other cities still needed help, and the plague was still active in remote areas. But they had proven something today. They had shown that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons, but their willingness to stand and fight when others would run, to risk everything to save people they had never met. The crystal plague had met its match, not in superior firepower, but in simple human courage. The crystal dust drifted through space like stardust, all that remained of the plague that had nearly destroyed a civilization. 1 year had passed since humanity's desperate race to save the Valerian people, and the last traces of the crystalline infection were finally being eliminated from Valerian space. On the newly rebuilt Valerian capital world, sunlight streamed through tall windows into the joint Valerian-Human Council chamber. The room buzzed with quiet conversation as representatives from both species gathered for a historic ceremony. The architecture blended both cultures, sleek Valerian crystal metal alloys alongside warm earth woods and stones. Ambassador Park stood at the podium, looking out over the assembled delegates. The scars on his hands, earned during the battle against the plague, caught the light as he adjusted his notes. In the front row sat Captain Song, Dr. Han, Dr. Kim, and other heroes of what historians now called the Salvation Campaign. 1 year ago, Park began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Humanity received a distress call from a people we had never met. Today, we gather not as strangers, but as friends and allies. The survivors of the plague, still over 1 million strong, had begun the long process of rebuilding their civilization. But unlike before, they weren't doing it alone. Human construction crews worked alongside Valerian architects. Earth scientists collaborated with Valerian researchers. Two species, separated by vast distances and evolutionary paths, had found common ground in courage and compassion. Today marks not just the survival of the Valerian people, Park continued, but the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history. Together, we will show the galaxy that compassion and courage are not weaknesses. They are the greatest strengths we possess. In orbit above, the combined Valerian human defense fleet conducted training exercises. Ships from both species maneuvered in perfect harmony, their crews having learned to work together during the darkest days of the plague. The other spacefaring races watched with growing interest as this unlikely alliance grew stronger. The Valerians had shared their advanced technology freely with their human saviors. Faster-than-light drives, energy shields, medical breakthroughs, gifts given not out of obligation, but genuine gratitude and friendship. But more valuable than any technology was the bond forged between the two species. In research facilities across both civilizations, scientists studied the remains of the crystal plague, working to ensure nothing like it could ever threaten life again. The primitive bacteria that had saved the Valerians became the foundation for new medical treatments, turning the weapon against the plague into a tool for healing. Dr. Han, now leading the Joint Research Initiative, often reminded his teams that the elegant solution wasn't always the most advanced one. Sometimes, the simplest answer, like common soil bacteria, could achieve what the most sophisticated technology could not. The other galactic civilizations that had turned their backs on the Valerians in their hour of need now sought to rebuild diplomatic ties. But they found the political landscape forever changed. Humanity and the Valerians stood together, their alliance a reminder that true civilization meant helping others, regardless of the risk. Captain Song, his hair now streaked with gray, spent his days training new crews for the joint fleet. He would never forget the sight of humans and Valerians fighting side by side against the plague, risking everything to save lives. That spirit of sacrifice and cooperation became the foundation of the alliance. As Ambassador Park concluded his speech, a new message arrived from Earth's deep space monitoring stations. Another distress signal from another unknown species facing a different kind of crisis. Without hesitation, the Joint Council authorized a response mission. Because that's what the Alliance stood for now, a promise that no cry for help would go unanswered, no matter the risk. Human determination combined with Valerian wisdom and technology created something new in the galaxy: hope. In the stars above, human and Valerian ships patrolled together, their crews bound by shared purpose and mutual respect. They were ready to face whatever challenges the universe might bring next, knowing they would face them together. The crystal plague had tried to turn all life into cold, unchanging crystal. Instead, it had forged something far stronger, a bond between two species that would reshape the galaxy's future, not through force or fear, but through courage, compassion, and the simple truth that sometimes the greatest strength lies in being willing to help others in their darkest hour. The legacy of those desperate days lived on, not in monuments or ceremonies, but in the daily cooperation between humans and Valerians, in their shared commitment to facing the unknown together, and in their determination to show the galaxy a better way forward.